Hello, everyone, and welcome to KuppingerCole webinar. Today, we're talking about modern and future-proof PAM solutions. And to do that, I'm joined by Johannes Hauer, who is a lead consultant with IC Consult. And IC Consult are also the sponsors for today's webinar. So let's get cracking. Before we start, just a few house rules. You, as a listener, don't need to do anything, so you're muted. You don't need to mute or unmute yourself. We'll be doing a couple of polls through the webinar to just get your feedback on certain issues around today's topic. And of course, there is a Q&A at the end of the webinar, as usual. For those of you, or rather those of your colleagues that perhaps couldn't make today's live webinar, then there will be a recording available tomorrow with all the slides from both speakers. So that's that. So let's have a look at today's agenda. So I'll be speaking first, talking a little bit about just some general trends emerging in privileged access management. After that, we'll have Johannes, as I said, who will be taking a little more of a deep dive into PAM, its capabilities, SaaS, and things like that. And then we'll have our Q&A and wrap up at the end. So let's have a look at, I always do this, or I seem to have done it on the last few webinars anyway, but talking about the business demands on IT, identity management and security, because quite often we don't always remember that behind every piece of technology is a business demand or a business reason for it to be there. Before that, let's kick off our first poll. So I'm asking, what do you think is the biggest challenge to security in multi-cloud environments? 3 choices. So number 1, credentials, secrets, or data left unprotected in the cloud. Number 2, no control over privileged accounts which have access to cloud. Or 3, poor cloud architecture design and a lack of network hygiene. So those are the 3 choices. You can vote now. We'll just give you 30 seconds or so to do that. So what is the biggest challenge in security in multi-cloud? Is it credentials, secrets, or data left unprotected? Is it no control over privileged accounts with access that have access to the cloud? Or poor cloud architecture design and a lack of network hygiene? One of those, either of those would be bad. So, okay, so most people have now voted. So let's move on into the main part of the webinar. So I said we don't always talk about business demands, but here are 7 demands or topics that businesses are looking for in modern organizations post the pandemic, post the economic problems that we have all had to endure across the world. Business now is looking a lot more for more agile ways of doing things. That includes right across the board, really, throughout all the lines of business. So right from HR through to marketing, product development, depending obviously on what kind of sector the business is in. But everything needs to be more agile, it needs to be more rapid, it needs to be able to respond quicker to changing market conditions. We've seen that in almost all sectors, those businesses that can innovate faster, that can respond quickly to customer demands, are the ones that are doing better. And internally, that also means then that the pressure is on for those groups within the business, such as developers, production professionals, IT managers, security people, of course, identity managers, right up to the CISO and the CIO need to rapidly roll out services and products to meet the agile demands of the business. They need to improve those infrastructures, and quite often this will mean moving to the cloud, because we all know cloud has huge advantages in terms of flexibility, deployment, speed, agility. At the same time, costs are going through the roof virtually everywhere. Raw materials cost more, they're in short supply. So anything that the business can do to reduce costs for itself or from its suppliers, and then pass on those cost savings to its customers, they will look for. Related to that, of course, productivity. Productivity is a word that is used a lot recently, particularly on a macroeconomic scale. So various economies are seen to be low on productivity, others a bit higher up the scale, but productivity is also a micro thing. So any business, any industry, any place where people and machines get together to produce something, if they can produce that in less time for less cost, then they will increase productivity. And while all this is happening, data, it used to be rather misleadingly said a few years ago that data was the new oil, which isn't really true. But what is true is that data is now ubiquitous. There are huge amounts of it being created every day, again, in micro and macro forms. But increasingly businesses now realize that there is, if not oil there is gold, in as much that some of this data, if it is harvested, if it is looked at properly, reveals some hidden secrets about how the business is run, how customers respond, etc. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, something that we're sort of focusing on today, and that is the cloud is where most businesses are now looking to put it in a more everyday vernacular, put stuff. So there are the business demands for that we're seeing right now. And the consequences of that is that types of cloud or cloud technologies are now seen as the majority pattern of how businesses see that they can get to some of those demands. But the cloud itself has split into many areas, and many businesses will have clouds in this, like they'll have multiple clouds operating within the business. They will access clouds from not only their own business, but obviously also from partners, etc. We're seeing the rise of what can be called shadow cloud, where lines of business are, because it's so easy, because you can set up an instance on AWS pretty quickly and easily, and you can use any credit card to pay for it. But we're seeing that clouds are being run up or spun up and used by businesses which are not formally part of the IT infrastructure, except that they are, because as soon as that cloud is used, as soon as that cloud is deployed, it connects in some way to the existing infrastructure. It's not controlled though, that's the key thing. So we see software as a service. Increasingly, applications are run as a service. We're seeing platform as a service, so where applications are developed within the organization. And of course, infrastructure itself is becoming cloud driven or created in the cloud. And all three of those things, multiple cloud, shadow cloud, SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS, are all mixed up and all become almost like one thing, very hard to manage. Added to that, we see the rise of coders, developers, the importance of coders and developers within organizations. They are taking on a new importance. They are seen as the engine that drives innovation, that drives the development of applications, etc. But they are the ones that are using and creating all the multi-cloud, shadow cloud, etc. So we need to move into more of an area of entitlement management where we can manage how users are accessing clouds, moving more towards a zero trust type of model. And when it comes down to privilege access management, which for a long time has been seen as the de facto or the default way of managing those identities which have access to high value, high security entities, we have to start thinking, is existing privilege access management agile enough for this new world? Is it agile enough for the consequences of cloud, which are related to the business demands? So that's the background. That's kind of a very high level view of what's happening in organizations and in business and in IT. Let's look at some trends within the privilege access management market itself. Before that, let's do our second poll before we get into privilege access management and ask, does your business currently have any form of PAM in operation? So the choices are, no, we are investigating the market for a solution. Yes, but we do not use a dedicated platform, so you may be using some kind of DIY privilege access management based on existing technologies. Or three, no, we think we are happy with the PAM you have at the moment. So you can vote now. We'll give you, as I say, about 30 seconds. I'll just take a quick drink. So just letting those votes come in. So number one, we are investigating the market for a solution. Yes, but we do not use a dedicated platform, as in one off the shelf, one from a vendor. No, we think we are happy with PAM that we have at the moment. All right, so let's close that. Thanks very much for voting. So I, at KuppingerCole, have spent the last 3 years working closely with PAM vendors and write the annual Privilege Access Management Leadership Campus. The third one I'm in the process of closing right now. That will be out before the end of 2022. But what I've noticed, these are some of the key things that have emerged, at least for me, in the last 3 years, that PAM is kind of both a mature and not a mature market, which is interesting because each year there seems to be more entrants into the market, which is unusual. And these entrants are coming from different parts of the globe, so places like Asia, South America, etc., which have kind of disrupted the status quo of the established big PAM vendors. And those entrants have actually stimulated quite a lot of innovation, and then they've seen gaps in the market, and they've particularly seen opportunities for PAM for cloud. We're seeing a kind of divergence slightly of where PAM providers provide a suite of products. So the idea is that they have a number of modules that in theory, if you buy into that, you should be able to cover all bases of privilege access management. So they would have things like privilege elevation, they would have application to application privilege management, and they would usually have a very robust set of analytics tools. But we're seeing, as I said, with the new entrants, we're seeing a more app approach, which kind of strips out some of those areas of privilege access management which have been bolted on over the years to make them more complex applications. And they're sort of gone for a cloud native and lean approach, which does the basics of PAM in that it does manage access to those things that businesses want to keep secret. And very recently, we've seen the emergence of what has become known as cloud infrastructure and entitlement management solutions, which is very much disrupting the PAM market because it's doing exactly what I've just said. It is taking one part of the PAM sort of technologies and focusing on what we've been talking about in this webinar, the cloud, and managing entitlements to the cloud. It also does away almost with the idea of privilege in that it just allows organizations to manage what identities have access to what entities and resources. It does it more on a zero trust, a more just-in-time basis, which I mentioned here. It starts to move away from passwords and vaults, so that we see these technologies are using certificates or more other ephemeral forms of authorization, authentication, and gives access to identities for a very limited time so they can go in, do whatever they need to do, and then it will be shut down. So the PAM market, as I said, is kind of mature and immature because it seems to be very dynamic and is actually exciting, but it also makes it harder perhaps to find the right choice if you're a buyer. So finally then, your deployment or PAM deployment needs to adapt a little. And this slide can actually apply to many technologies that we talk about on a daily basis at Kuppinger. But with the growth of CIAM, with the growth of passwordless and just-in-time solutions, much of that relies on automation. It relies on stuff that once would have been manually configured, needs to be automated. And we're now seeing that the automation of this is possible and that it is safe to allow the platform to use some form of machine learning or AI to automate those capabilities that in the past may have had to be managed by administrators, etc. We're seeing that a centralized monolithic approach for PAM platforms and their related policy engines are not necessarily suited to the cloud and the cloud way of working. So we need more dynamic access to resources, data, etc. The idea of having a big PAM platform is still valuable for many organizations. It's valuable for large-scale organizations. It's valuable for those organizations that have existing privilege accounts which don't change that much, which always need access to the same kind of thing. That is still useful to have that as a centralized platform. But what we're seeing is the teams that are using technology in your organization are increasingly moving out of the CIO or CISO's zone of influence. CISOs are becoming, an enterprise position. They are burdened, perhaps is the right way to use it, but they're kind of burdened with strategy, accounting, budgets, etc., and overall planning. While that's happening, they've got guys in devs, in development, that are doing exactly what I said right at the start, which is buying their own clouds, etc. So we need to think about how we manage that, and how either technology or admins which don't need the level of skill that they needed in the past can manage privileged access management closer to where it's happening. We need, if we can, to enable zero trust as far as possible. This is not about zero trust, this webinar, but zero trust where you treat every identity as untrusted and only trust it once you have verified it. We need to verify, entitle, and secure, but we need to do that rapidly, and we need to do that dynamically. And again, that comes back to, if we verify, entitle, and secure on an agile basis dynamically, we are pleasing the guys that want that access, but are also pleasing the policies that exist within your organization for access, and we're pleasing the business that is getting stuff done. So PAM deployment has got to adapt, and that doesn't just mean whether it can be deployed in the cloud, on premises, etc., or SaaS. It's also about how you think about deployment. And I think I'm slightly out of time here, but I just want to show you basically where we see PAM sitting right now in this new identity flow, in the new world of PAM and cloud infrastructure entitlement management. Basically, it sits there between the identities who then need access to cloud services, and that's where they find the resources. So here's some stuff to think about before I hand over to Johannes. Your choice is wider, no doubt about it. The choice of PAM is wider than ever. The tools are all good. They all have capabilities that are worth looking at. But that makes it actually harder, I think, particularly if you already have if you bought into some PAM, but finding it doesn't cover all the uses that you need. So you need to redefine your privilege framework. Think about what privilege means in your organization and decide on what are the essential capabilities that you need. Embrace that automation in infrastructure as a service and ops, and how that can assist PAM, and start thinking about those PAM tools which, going back to this slide, fit into a more dynamic resource entitlement and access management architecture, such as we see here, which can cope with all 6 types of identities: admin, developers, end users, machine, third party, and endpoints. So explore those solutions and think, carefully about how your organization is set up. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Johannes Hauer, who is a consultant with IC Consult, and he'll be talking about the future, I hope. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. I want to talk a bit about implementing modern and future-proof PAM solutions. And we will take a look on following points. First, what are the challenges with implementing a PAM solution? What are the advantages of a classical PAM solution? What PAM models we have, and what modules we have, and what does these modules offer? And at least a roadmap how to build up and plan a PAM project, and how IC Consult could assist you. The challenges: we have a growing number of more or less visible cyber attacks involving privileged accounts, and complexity is a security risk, and it's with growing complexity, the security risk is getting higher. The overview of existing privileged accounts and who's using them is missing more and more, even when it comes to the topic cloud. In the last couple of years, remote work and VPN became a much bigger part in most of the companies. And there is an ongoing and growing transition from on-premise to the cloud in general. And at least when it comes to PAM, there's always the topic regulations and compliance. From a security aspect, nearly 90% of all breaches involves human failure. And nearly a bit more than 60% of all breaches involve stolen credentials. And mostly it needs human failure to steal credentials. And with these credentials, an attacker can assume a new identity. Comparing to the real world, it's like visit a military base with the keys of the commander. It could end in a nightmare. The most important risks for business in 2022 are cyber incidents, business interruption, natural catastrophes, pandemic outbreak, and changes in legislation and regulation. And as you can see, the numbers are for cyber incident and business interruption are high. 80% of all breaches involve privileged accounts, and opposite to this 60% before. It's not stolen credentials, it's privileged credentials in general. 85% of cyber attacks are done through compromised endpoints, and related to Windows, 96% of critical vulnerabilities could be mitigated by removing local administrative rights. But if this is so clear, why securing privileged accounts on-premise or in the cloud is not part of a lot of infrastructure designs and applications as well? Well, there are several challenges. The first and the biggest challenge is the complexity. The world is in a state of continuous growth and change, and complexity is growing as well. Often there's no global identity management. Accounts are stored in Active Directories, locally or within applications. And when it comes to cloud, we have applications that are in the cloud infrastructure, and there are accounts that are related to the cloud management infrastructure. It's hard to prevent sharing credentials for privileged accounts on a technical level. And the limit access on access points, so using a firewall or VPN, has a high administrative effort, and there's no handling on application level. So if there is access on application level, firewall cannot block that. When it comes to cloud transition, the number of accounts is rising, and it's getting more complex because with the cloud management level, there is a no permission level with multiple roles and access rights. There are cross-application and platform authorizations. There's excessive privileges, and there are rapid deployment and implementation cycles. For highly regulated industries, there's an additional point, that is regulations and compliance. For example, banking and healthcare are required to maintain a comprehensive audit trail of privileged user activity. And in most cases, they are driven by enterprise policy level and from industry regulations and compliance frameworks. With onboard tools that are offered by Microsoft with Windows or any cloud provider, regulations can be met functionally maybe, but in most cases not audit proof. And there's always a high administrative expenses. The advantages of a PAM solution: the target goal is zero trust and least privilege. And that should result in a reduction of complexity, raising security and meet compliance. With the PAM system, we have a central access point to the whole company infrastructure and a central management of privileged accounts for human and also for machine accounts. We can implement strong authentication. We have access control based on a roles and rights concept. We can implement password visibility revocation. We can automate authentication to target assets. And we have automated password provisioning for technical accounts or applications. And at least for compliance, recording and monitoring of all privileged activities. When it comes to different infrastructures, most manufacturers of PAM solutions are really flexible, building them up on-premise or in the cloud as software as a service, or a hybrid infrastructure with parts in the cloud and, for example, the database on-premise, because some customers don't want to store their critical data in the cloud. But when it's getting to cloud, what about managing the cloud infrastructure? Cloud infrastructure entitlement is PAM versus or with SIEM. So traditional PAM technologies were mainly designed for human and not for machine identities. And in cloud infrastructure, privileged entitlements are frequently assigned to regular identities that often belong to services. And when it's coming to PAM, we have to separate cloud management infrastructure from the cloud infrastructure. So from a PAM perspective, these are two separate points. To be honest, PAM tools currently have limitations in SIEM. In obtain an inventory of entities, policies, and identities, it's hard to identify overprivileged relationships between roles and identities. And there is no way to dynamically generate policy changes to enforce least privilege. And at least behavior and risk analytics is also hard to achieve. These problems are related to the cloud management infrastructure. For the cloud infrastructure itself, for the most PAM solution, it makes no difference or not a big difference if the servers are running in a cloud environment or on-premise. PAM tools are not designed for highly dynamic resources, and that's a big problem. The outcome is that currently SIEM is not possible with traditional PAM, but PAM can correlate with SIEM solutions very good. And SIEM solutions like Ematic are focused on visibility, detecting and remediating IAM misconfigurations, enforce least privilege to cloud resources, cloud services, and cloud administrative rights. They are specifically designed to tightly and consistently manage privilege in complex dynamic environments. And there is an additional point. Cloud provider also implement own services like privilege access management or identity access management in their own ecosystem. But often there's a lack of consistency and standards across clouds. And with the rising management complexity in hybrid infrastructures, it's becoming more risky and more complex to manage that. But the past shows that PAM has gone several evolutions, raised functionality to meet new requirements. So for example, threat analytics, AD bridging, or VPN-less external access are not classical PAM topics that were added in the past to traditional PAM solutions. So if we take a look to the future, SIEM can be the next evolution. PAM solutions are built up in a star-shaped design with a module for at least every functionality. And new modules can be added easily. So if you are running a PAM solution for several years, it's not a big deal to add new functionality to an existing environment, even if it's something like SIEM. Because at the end, the method, the module is speaking with the PAM environment is almost the same. As an example, CyberArk added a couple of years ago privileged threat analytics as a functionality, or Conjure, which is a secret management for cloud or container-based applications, and DevOps. Delinea added Centrify that brought AD bridging and several cloud tools. And at least a couple of months or last year, CyberArk added Adaptive for access management or VPN-less access. So in general, building up a PAM solution currently is not focused for, or is not possible to manage SIEM solutions or SIEM, but it can correlate with SIEM solutions. And from a technical perspective, there's no limitation in adding such a functionality to an existing environment. When it comes to implementing PAM, IC Consult is offer a roadmap. It is based on a maturity model that is separated into several phases. In the first phase, the focus is to recognize risks and plan actions. And then in the first phase, the focus is on get visibility and reduce attack surface, and start with the accounts that can be onboarded quickly and can be added to the automatic management easily without too much effort. This is the privileged administration part. And if that is running, then you have the biggest security risk reduced to a minimum. And then you can focus in the second phase on integrate company policies and limit overprivileged users. And then in the last step, that is always very important for operation and efficiency, increase automation and intelligence. When it comes to managing accounts, onboarding new accounts automatically, decommission accounts, join a leaver process, add the whole PAM solution to identity and access management solution if there is one available. We can provide you a roadmap to accelerate and simplify your PAM journey. There are several packages and customized solutions for any maturity starting point. And yes, contact us if you are interested in a workshop or in a free initial workshop. regarding your PAM journey. That's it from my side. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, Johannes, for your presentation. We're now in the Q&A section. But if I am right, we should also see the results of the polls appear on the screen. What do you think is the biggest obstacle to security? 42% said that credentials, secrets, or data left unprotected. Another 42% said no control over privileged accounts. 15% said poor cloud architecture and design. The second poll was, does your business currently use PAM? 35% says no, which is a significant number. 35% said no. 20% are not using a dedicated platform. And 45% remain happy with the PAM solution or platform that they have. So that's pretty interesting, Johannes, that we have 55% that actually don't either have no PAM or are not using a vendor specific one. What do you make of that?
Yes, it is surprising because it is critical regarding privileged accounts, especially when you take a look at the Windows world, where it's really easy to steal credentials. For example, if you take a look at Kerberos technology that is building up a ticket for every sign-on on the Windows server and storing it in the local RAM, and it's really easy to dump the tickets out of the RAM and do a pass to hash and get that hash, and then you can easily authenticate to any server without knowing the password, because you can use the hash and do a single sign-on. And from my experience, a lot of administrators use administrative domain accounts to do their work. And every time they log onto a server, this hash is stored in the server. And if someone is capturing that, and it is an administrative or privileged account, it's only a question of time if you can reach the Active Directory or domain controller, and then he has the key to the kingdom. So it's really a high risk.
Thank you. A question here from Muthu Krishnan, a listener. He said, cool presentation, so that's nice. But his question is PAM mainly around service accounts and administrators only? What is it expected to cover in a hybrid, as in on-premise and cloud setup?
I'm not sure if I understand the question. So
he's saying that traditionally PAM has been focused on service accounts and administrators only, which have been the traditional users.
Yeah, it's in general focused on human accounts, and there is no limitation or extension to functionality if you are running it on-premise or in a hybrid cloud or in the cloud itself. It's related to the PAM infrastructure itself. But from a management perspective, it totally makes sense to add your privileged your PAM solution to the cloud or to the cloud environment as well, to secure your environment there too. And with environment, I mean the servers that are running in the cloud, as I said, the management infrastructure for cloud. So SIEM is not possible to handle by classic PAM solution. It's related to the infrastructure. And there you can also focus on the human accounts that are stored in the cloud and on the servers. Even if it's cloud in terms of Azure or something else. So there are connectors that are working with that service too, and it's able to add that to the PAM solution as well.
Thank you, fantastic. So what could be done? Yeah, this is maybe a bit of a long question or an open-ended question. So what could be done if the PAM solution is gone completely down, if it's offline? So how do people still get to do their work? How do they still access their accounts?
Yeah, that's always a big fear, because if you implement zero trust and least privilege, then you have single point of failure with the PAM solution, because then it's the only way you can access your environment. So there are several possibilities like HR or disaster recovery and break-glass processes that give you a solution for several kinds of escalation. And even if all is complete down, there's always a way to get or retrieve passwords and credentials from the vault. So if this is not possible anymore, then I would say the whole world is burning.
Well, it's true that many PAM vendors will provide that as capabilities, but one thing that, like I talked about, is the emergence of new entrants. They don't always necessarily have such break glass or high availability, so that's something important to look out for. What interfaces then? I talked about automation, but what interfaces can a PAM solution offer for automation processes? I think that means perhaps, I'm not sure if that means physically an interface or a connector, but how would you interpret that?
I would say it's a connector to speak with other technologies or applications, like an identity and access management solution or an automation script. So I think most of the biggest PAM manufacturers offer something like a REST API, where you can send commands and retrieve information and send information and modify the environment. And in terms of CyberArk or Delinea, the functionality of this REST API is growing and growing as they see that automation is becoming a bigger and bigger topic for the customers. Because in general, running a PAM solution has a high operational effort, and the target is always to reduce the effort. And for that, we need automation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so finally then, this is a question from me actually. If you were to sort of, what those 55% are that as yet have not really investigated privileged access management, what would be your first piece of advice to one of those customers?
The first helpful step would be to sit together in a workshop and take a look at their environment, and maybe do a discovery scan and take a look at the numbers of privileged accounts that are flying around in the network, and then talk about what could be a possible way to secure this account, regardless to any PAM solution or other stuff. Just get a clear picture of what the current status is and what are the risks are, and then we can talk about the next steps. And there are tools. For example, CyberArk is offering a DNA tool that can discover privileged accounts on Unix, Windows, local or domain devices and list them and can classify them as privileged or non-privileged. And in most cases, customers are shocked about the high number that they have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to say that a lot of organizations have no idea how many privileged accounts they actually have or what people have access to. So yeah, great advice.
That's true.
We don't have any more questions coming in, so I think I'll close the webinar. Say thanks to everyone. Thanks to you. We had a great attendance today. I hope it was worthwhile. I hope you enjoyed it. Big thanks to Johannes Hauer for his presentation, and also to IC Consult for supporting the webinar today. If you do have any questions following this, there's my email, should be on your screen. You can send questions to me, and if you want them to direct them to Johannes, I can make sure they go to him. But don't forget also that this will be online for download from tomorrow, I believe. In the meantime, thank you all, and have a very good morning, afternoon, or evening. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks, Paul, to you too. Bye.